Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this week's Friday Reads, where I talk about everything I read in the last week, what I'm currently in the middle of, and what I think I'm going to be getting to next week. And I had an amazing reading month, starting with finishing Voyage of the Basilisk by Marie Breton. So this is the third book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. Lady Trent is a world-renowned dragon naturalist, and these books are her memoirs of how she became a world-renowned dragon naturalist. And this book, like I was saying last week, I enjoy these books in part because they are framed as a memoir. I really love that framing device, but also because there's quite a bit of science. I like watching scientists do science. And I was struggling with this book because it felt like there was less science. And then I went and continued to read it, and immediately there was more science, which was great. But unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough to save this book for me. It was still good, and I still liked it. I gave it 4 stars, but so far this is definitely the weakest book of the 3, I would say, for me personally. Which is a little sad because I thought the premise of our main character being on a voyage and discovering, like, going around to try to find different kinds of dragon species to compare them was a really interesting premise. So that's a little bit sad for me, but I did finish it. I did still enjoy it. I will continue on with the series. And then I picked up Square Cube by Mira Grant, which is an adult horror novella. And in this, there is basically like a rift opens, multiple rifts around Earth open, and like these monsters come through, and like whole towns disappear where these rifts opened up. So not even just like the monsters stomping on them, but like they just disappear. And our main character is determined to figure out what has happened, basically. And the story goes from there. And I liked this. I didn't find this to be as horrific as, or like horror genre, as I normally do with Mira Grant. As always, I find it really interesting and thought-provoking. I like that frequently for horror novellas from Mira Grant, we do get a lot of what are people willing to do when push comes to shove. I really kind of like that exploration of various characters. And we do get some of that in here as well. So I didn't find it to be scary or like fill me with dread or anything like that. I actually found it mostly to just kind of be interesting. A little bit more like, I would have put it more fantasy with horror elements, I guess. Although I know that's not quite right for this. Anyway, I thought it was a good time. As with most of these novellas, I wish we had expanded, like I wish they were longer and we could expand out on some ideas, because I think some of the things were a little bit underdeveloped, but I still enjoyed it. So I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And then I picked up The Merchant and the Rogue by Sarah M. Eden. I just blanked on the name. So this is the third book in the Dread Penny Society series, which is a adult historical romance series. And in this particular one, we are following Brogan, I think his name is, and he's got a special assignment from the head of the society, the Dread Penny Society, and he's got to go undercover into a shop to figure out what's going on. And he thinks that the shopkeeper is amazing. So that she is just absolutely his cup of tea. And the story kind of goes from there. And I DNF'd this, surprisingly. I DNF'd it at 110 pages ish. So here's the deal. I liked the first one. I really did. And then the second one, I didn't like as much. And when I was talking about it, I was like, the plot wasn't as good. The characters weren't as good, that kind of thing. And what I realized in this book, number 3, is that part of why I thought that they weren't as good is because they felt very cookie cutter. Sort of. I mean, it feels like they were made from the same mold and then just given some different details, because it's like all 3 of these male leads feel very similar. They don't have the same kind of background, but somehow they still manage to be very similar in personality, and like they all twinkle at our heroine. And do you know what I mean? And like our heroines seem, even though they do things that are different, they also feel very similar, and the stories feel kind of similar. And so while I don't think it was bad, I was a bit bored. And as I got to page 100 and 110, whatever, I realized that I was going to be rating this a 3 stars, and not because of the quality. So if I rate something 3 stars because the quality, but I really enjoyed it, I'll still read those because I'm having a good time. But if I'm going to rate it 3 stars because of my enjoyment level, I tend to DNF those. And so that's what I did here. I just went ahead and DNF'd it, and I'm not going to continue on with this series. And then I picked up When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which is an adult thriller. At least that's what it's billed as. Although I have heard a number of people say that it reads much more like horror, and it's a horror about gentrification, that our main character lives in this neighborhood that is in the process of being gentrified, and like what that means for her as one of the original residents. And there is, I think, some actual horror thriller elements to this, but I didn't get to it because I DNF'd it at page 25. Now, I went into this book knowing that I'm not generally the intended audience for this, especially since I don't read horror or much horror or thriller. But I'm not the intended audience. But I'm like, even if I'm not the intended audience, of course I can still enjoy it. But I started reading it, and I wasn't vibing with the writing, and I wasn't vibing with the main character. So like all 3 of those things together meant that I just wasn't really connecting to this book at all. I was 25 pages in, and I still just did not want to pick it up. So I went ahead and DNF'd it. And then I picked up Passing Strange by Ellen Klages. And this is an adult historical fantasy romance novella. I think it's a novella. It might be considered a short novel. I'm not really sure. But this is really hard to describe, but basically we are in 1940s, maybe late 1930s kind of time frame in San Francisco, and we're following this group of queer women, and eventually we are following 2 in particular who fall in love with each other, and like how do they navigate this sapphic relationship at a time where that is very much outlawed. So the story goes from there. And this was really interesting. Like I really loved the structure of this, where we start in modern day and then we go into the past, and then at the very end we come back to modern day, and like based off of what has happened, it works really, really well. I didn't necessarily care for our main couple characters, but I did like the little friends around them. They were really fun. And honestly, I just thought this was kind of a lovely story. The ending just was surprising, but I really liked it. So it is mostly historical. There are some fantastical, magical kind of elements to it, although it is and is not a huge part of this story. But really it feels very romantic. So yeah, this was really interesting, and I was very much surprised by how much I enjoyed this, but I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then I picked up Desperate Measures by Katee Robert, which is an interesting one for me to pick up. But I had this whim where I was like, you know what? I'm going to try a romance on audio. It may go horribly because like I don't necessarily especially want to listen to sex scenes in my ears. But we'll see how it goes, because maybe it'll be fine, because I would like to try to I wanted to see if I could listen to a new book, not a reread, on audio. They happen to have this. I had heard this described as a very steamy romance, and I was just like, I'll try it. it definitely borders the line between steamy romance and just straight up erotica. And actually, I would put it into straight up erotica. So that was very exciting for me. But this is essentially the first book in a series, an adult erotica series. Of course, it's adult. But it's a reimagining, a take on Aladdin, where Jasmine is the daughter of, I'm assuming, a crime boss, and Jafar is his right-hand man, and Jafar takes over the family business by killing the father, of course, and claiming Jasmine, and Jasmine has to decide how she's going to deal with Jafar and get out of this situation, and the story kind of goes from there. Now, like I said, this is erotica. We open, like, the very first chapter, the very first scene has sex in it. But not only that, this is very much a kink kind of book. There is definitely BDSM and a type of specific dominant submissive relationship where there's consensual non-consent. So, you know, everything is above board. There's safe words and everything. So if it was truly something a person did not want, they have a safe word to stop. But like, they're still saying no, even as it continues to happen. So just a heads up, there's some also like daddy kink in there. For a full list, I would recommend going to Katie Roberts' website, because she does list off the tropes, the trigger warnings, and like tags that you would see for like AO3, for example. And they're very good. So I would definitely recommend that. But ultimately, this was a really interesting thing, because it felt like an erotica that was kind of sex light, because we had an actual plot. So Jasmine is trying to figure out like what she is going to do. It is a coherent plot as well. And there is like this outside force that Jafar is trying to deal with in the form of Ali. And like, it's very interesting. It does have this coherent plot. There is still quite a bit of sex though, because it is erotica. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. I will admit, by the end, I was thinking it was just a bit too wordy. There was a lot of description. There was a lot of like Jasmine ruminating on her feelings. And I was just like, I think this is a lot. This feels like a lot. I feel like we could cut this down and make it just a little bit shorter, and then it would have worked even better. But I did really like the ending of this, like the plot and how that went. I think that the sex is generally pretty well written. The audiobook was a little weird for me. I thought it's a dual perspective book, and they do have two different narrators, and the female narrator, I don't remember her name, was pretty good, but the voice of the male narrator was like gravelly whisper. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Kiefer Sutherland in 24. That's what it reminded me of, and I was just like, that's not a thing for me. So that was a little bit difficult to deal with, but just so you know. And so, yeah, like I thought that this was interesting, but ultimately, like the mix of elements didn't quite work for me. So I ended up giving it 3.25, but I am very interested to read other books in this series to see if maybe some of them do work better for me. And then the very last thing that I picked up and finished is Year of the Witch by Temperance Alden. So this is a nonfiction. The subtitle is Connecting with Nature's Seasons Through Intuitive Magic. And I picked it up because I really wanted to know the various holidays that witches celebrate. And this is a book that I have incredibly mixed feelings about, because it does go through like the 8 major holidays on the witches like wheel. But this author is just like, how she approached this book felt very strange, because some things were incredibly well researched. We got like papers cited about climate change. But then when we get into like practice and like, how do you celebrate Samhain, she really just talked about how she personally celebrates it. And she did say like some other people do it similarly, but like she didn't give a wide variety of like how people celebrate. So it was just like, where are your research chops here? Like, why didn't you research that part too? There was also a lot more mentions of Jesus than I really expected in a witchy book. Which I guess is fine, like, and especially if you're a witchy Christian, like that's okay, but like definitely wasn't expecting that. And generally speaking, just the talk of the gods, and it wasn't just a, hey, this is a feast that started as a celebration of a god, but like here's some more non or more agnostic or atheist ways to celebrate these, like non-religious ways to celebrate these holidays, whatever. She's just kind of like talking about the gods and their way, how you celebrate them, and then moves into discussing how to celebrate these holidays. But it feels like maybe that's how you should do it if you believe in those gods. And also, especially because there's a lot of talk about having an altar, which you don't have to believe in a god to have an altar, but there was a lot of, it was all mixed up. It was very like, I felt a little bit out of place because I don't believe in gods and I don't believe in nature spirits. And so like, I'm like, hey, I still should be able to celebrate these things, but I feel like you're not giving me a lot of options here. So that was a little bit strange. There were a lot of exclamation points, just like the editor side of myself is like, there are too many exclamation points in this text. But one of the things that I do really appreciate is that she is all about like, if you're on a budget, that's cool. If you want to change the wheel of the year to match like your actual seasons, go for it. This is like, you should feel free to change the holidays around as it works for you and as it works for the location that you're living in. Like, if you're living in the southern hemisphere, you may not feel comfortable celebrating Yule, which is a winter celebration, in the middle of summer because December is summer, right? So like, I really did appreciate that. She's just like, do what works for you. You're going to have to make some decisions and maybe they don't all feel completely right, but like, you got to do what works for you. And I did really appreciate that. But overall, there is a lot of like, I feel like I could have probably gotten the same kind of information from a different book and maybe even gotten more information from a different book. So yeah, very mixed feelings about reading this. I ended up giving it 3.25 stars. So those are all the things that I finished. And so now I'm in the middle of Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, which is the first book in the Books of Amba series duology. I've only read a chapter. I've read 18 pages, so I really couldn't tell you too much about it, except, I like the writing so far. So we'll see. Hopefully it continues to work for me. And then I did also read a little bit more in Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the third book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and I've been listening to this on audiobook as I do like crafty kind of things. And so I don't remember exactly where I am. I think I'm about an hour into this audiobook now, which is a little bit further than where I was last week. So yeah, a little bit further on. I'm enjoying it because I like Murderbot. It's a reread, so I'm not terribly worried about reading it quickly. And that's it. Those are all the things that I am in the middle of. So for next week, I am going to read, of course, I'm going to read Rogue Protocol as I want to listen to an audiobook, especially as I'm doing like crafty kind of things. I will be focusing primarily on Empire of Sand because I would really like to read this book and finish it up. It's been on my TBR for so long, like my Goodreads TBR. So I finally decided to read it. And then if I finish that, some possibilities, the most likely possibilities are Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz, which is a YA romance. I think it's YA historical romance with maybe some fantastical elements. I don't know. There seems to be a lot going on in this particular book. And then Sun Daughters, Sea Daughters by Amy Ogden, which is a science fiction novella reimagining of The Little Mermaid. So Those are the most likely for me to pick up. But since this week was like such an amazing reading week, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to follow it up with another amazing reading week. So it might just be really Empire of Sand. We'll see how it goes. But that is it. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books that I mentioned in this particular video, please leave me a comment down below. But that's it. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!